Now, of course, one of the great things about having code under version control is that you can keep track of your development process and roll back if you make mistakes and so on. And it also makes it easy to share code with other people. And it's because GitHub has all these great facilities, it means it's really easy to share code and to visualize what's going on in your development process. But it turns out that simply by putting our application under Git for version control as opposed to another version control system, we've also gotten ourselves a great deployment option. So that is our next and final task in this lesson. So when I wrote a Ruby on Rails tutorial book a few years ago, my co-author and I punted the deployment to the last chapter, and we did as good a job as we could, but there wasn't really much you could do at that point because Rails deployment was really hard. There were so many different things you had to worry about. There weren't really all that many good options. But nowadays things have changed completely. Now almost any shared host will support Rails in one way or another, and there are also dedicated companies like Engine Yard and Rails Machine for Rails deployment. And then there are cloud services like Engine Yard Cloud and the company that whose services we'll be using, Heroku. We'll see that by having our source code under version control with Git, that deploying our application to Heroku is almost scandalously easy. It's really absurd how easy this is. The first step is to install the Heroku gem, gem install Heroku. And while that's installing, let's go take a look at the Heroku website. Of course, I already have an account at Heroku, but if you don't have one, you should sign up for one at this point. Heroku has a lot of stuff that's free by default. It's really amazing how much is free. If your application gets big, it starts needing a big database for a lot of processors, then of course they have a pay option. But there's all kinds of great stuff you can do at Heroku without having to pay, including launching this kind of application. All right, the Heroku gem is installed. Now let's take a look at what we need to do to get it working. Now this is a step you probably will only have to do once. It's Heroku keys add. This adds your public key to Heroku. This lets you actually do the deploy. If you have any trouble with this, take a look at the Heroku documentation. They've got a lot of good documentation on their website. And now we're going to create a remote application at Heroku using the Heroku gem. So Heroku comes with a command. The Heroku gem comes with a command, Heroku, and then we just type create. All right, that command created it created a website for us called starksunset54.heroku.com. So let's go take a look at that. And there we are. Well, you know, it's not all that exciting, right? This is just some Heroku default page. This is not our first app. But if you think about it, it would be surprising if it were our first app. In fact, it would be a little bit disturbing if it were our first app, because it would have meant that Heroku could somehow reach into our local machine and pull out the application. But that's a hint. That's a hint about how we're going to do this. Instead of having Heroku pull it up, we're going to push it up. And the way we're going to do that is very simple. Let's take a look at why it's going to work, though. I'm going to take a look at a file called .gitconfig. This is a little bit advanced right now, and it's fine if you don't understand everything that's going on here. I just want to show you the sort of the shape of what we're doing. This gitconfig file is the file that got modified when we ran the command git remote add origin and then gave it the URL at GitHub. So these lines here were put in by that git remote add origin command that we ran before when we were deploying or when we were pushing up to GitHub. In this case, by running the Heroku create command, Heroku automatically configured our Git repository to be able to push to Heroku. And as you might be able to guess, instead of typing git push origin master, we're going to be typing git push Heroku master. So let's see how that works. All right, it looks like our git push Heroku master has finished running. Let's go take a look at Heroku and see what happened. Now, we've got the URL here, but I think it's already here. Yeah, here we've got it in the address bar. Let's reload it, see what happens. And there we are. The git push Heroku master actually did the deployment. We've already deployed the application. It's really amazing. It's essentially a one-step deploy. Now, if you look at this, you might be tempted to click on this about your application's environment link. I can feel the temptation right now. Oh no! Look at what happened. I clicked on the link and look what I got for it. The page you were looking for doesn't exist. So I just want to let you know that if you do give into temptation, as I did, that this is expected behavior here. Because of the way Heroku is set up and because of the kind of assumptions that the Rails default page makes, it's not configured properly to show the information about your application. But apart from that, this is our first app running on the live web at startsunset54.heroku.com. So before moving on, there is one thing I want to show you, which is how to create a subdomain. You might be worried about this sort of strange name for the application. Stark Sunset 54 is kind of poetic, but it's a little bit long, it's a little strange. So there is a way to rename this application with Heroku, rename, and then you can use anything that isn't already used. So I'm going to use mhartle. This will not work for you because I'm about to take it, but here we go. Heroku rename mhartle. This is my canonical username. You saw that was my username at GitHub. And now mhartle.heroku.com is, in fact, our first app. Now you might be wondering, well, what if you have a custom domain? Well, can you host that at Heroku? And the answer is yes, and it's even free. So for example, if you owned a domain name such as railstutorial.org, you might be able to host that at Heroku. And in fact, the Ruby on Rails tutorial website does run at Heroku. Even though the Rails tutorial website is mainly a static site and Heroku is designed for dynamic web applications, Heroku is still great for static sites. Moreover, I found that virtually any application, no matter how static it starts out, eventually mutates into a full-blown dynamic web application. And so by writing static websites in Rails and deploying them to Heroku, you end up with a lot of flexibility going forward. And that's it. Now we're done with our first app. We haven't learned a lot about Rails yet, but look at how far we've come. We've created a new Rails application. We've proven that we can get it running locally. We've put it under Git for version control. We've shared the code at GitHub, and we've even deployed it to a live website. So the next step is to start learning about the structure of a Rails application and actually take the next step by making an application that is a dynamic web application and not simply this single page that constitutes the first app. So let's get to it.